Welcome back, everyone. It's Michael with Offshore Citizen, and we are here today to talk about the subject of citizenship-based taxation and how it is becoming a possible threat in the world. So I did a post on Facebook and Twitter a little while back about this. I was quite upset because I'm Canadian that I saw a post or an article from a member of Parliament in Canada suggesting that we should have citizenship-based taxation in Canada. And as far as I'm concerned, this is hyper unjust, unfair, utter nonsense. It's ironic that he used the term fairness. Total bullshit as far as I'm concerned. And why is it that I say that? Well, fundamentally, the justice of taxation is based on the fact that you're benefiting from the services of the country and you're in a situation where, therefore you're contributing back to it, right? Now, if you use citizenship-based taxation, which such as the U.S. has it, it's unjust in the U.S.'s case. It's, makes a whole bunch of challenges for Americans. If you want some assistance with that, reach out to us. But totally unjust, right? Because you can go away. You could literally, there are people who are dual citizens. Their parents, maybe they had one parent who was American, one parent who was from some other part of the world. They were born abroad. They got citizenship through their one parent. They never have used the U.S. services at all, and yet they're subject to U.S. tax rules. They have to file a U.S. tax return every year, and they very likely could end up in a situation where they're having to pay tax in the U.S. regardless of never living there and never using the services. How just is that? That's a bunch of nonsense, right? Total nonsense. Now, I'm going to give you the counter arguments before we dive into kind of the political situation right now and why I think it's problematic and you should be aware of it. So, okay. First of all, the counter argument that they will give is they'll say, hey, listen, I'm in a situation where I live outside of the country. Well, I have the ability to come back and say, use the medical system, use whatever, right? I have the right to go and do that. Right now, this whole virus crisis thing is going on. And so, a lot of people would return back to their home country in these times. And how fair is it that they weren't contributing while then they're and then they go back when they need it, right? How fair is that? And there's an interesting philosophical argument about that. You could say, hey, look, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. But I don't think the best way to deal with that is to tax people. First of all, it makes no sense that they're taxed at the same rate as everybody else. This is crazy, right? Why would I have to pay 40+% of my income when on the off chance that I may use that at one point in time? If you'd like to go and counter that, you can turn around and you can say, which by the way, when you're back there anyway, you're paying sales tax, and so there is some contribution regardless. Anyway, if they want to say, hey, look, we don't want you abusing our privileges, our system, etc. Okay, great. Let them come back and wait until they've made a tax return and they've started paying taxes before you start giving them those services. There's no reason that you have to give them those services as soon as they arrive just because they're a citizen. So that's one thing that I think is fairly important. Some people will say, oh, hey, go and take another citizenship. Well, it's not exactly that easy, right? Maybe somebody wants to go and live in Singapore, but they're not able to. Maybe they go and live in some other country, but it takes 5 to 10 years. So they're saying, hey, yeah, I'd love to give up my citizenship, but it's just not an option. In the world today, you need to be able to travel. You leave your country, you're going to be stuck in some other place if you don't have a citizenship. So, arguably there's changes needed to the global citizenship rules, but that's a whole other global travel rules, but that's a whole other conversation. The point is, I definitely don't buy that line of thinking. Maybe if you were like, okay, 3% tax, and this is the price of having your citizenship. Okay, maybe even then I'm kind of pretty skeptical. The next thing is they may say, well, yeah, but you were raised in that country and therefore you benefited from that system and that helped you to get to where you are. Okay, well, if you want to apply that line of reasoning, then what you have to say on the flip side is anyone who wasn't born in that country and didn't benefit from that system, you shouldn't be taxing them along the way. So in other words, immigrants who come and move there shouldn't pay full tax because they didn't have the benefits of being raised in that system, right? And of course, they're not going to apply that. Basically, what's happening here is you have governments that are mismanaging money, they're irresponsible about their spending, and they feel like, oh, hey, we have a shortfall, a deficit, and we can't get that from our own people, so we need to go and look abroad and try and take other people's money. It's bad enough that they're taking, as much as they are of the people in their country's money, especially when there's, not necessarily fair representation, there's not necessarily proper use, like, maybe you're wasting that money on stupid arts projects that don't benefit the people, etc. They're non-essential, they're going and squandering it on corporate welfare, they're squandering it on things that favor their political party, etc., etc., etc. Never mind all of that nonsense, but on top of that, they're coming and they're saying, look, we're not managing our money well, so we're going to go and try and get money abroad. Bullshit. So anyway, I'm very against it. I think it's total garbage. Very, very against it. If you're in a situation where you're at all concerned about it, come to us, definitely, because let's, make a plan and deal with that problem. But I think it is important to realize that increasingly we have a global view of tax. Increasingly there are digital nomads. There are going to be more digital nomads. The estimate The Economist made, I forget, like a year or two ago, was there'd be 1 billion location-independent workers by 2030. Well, with the whole virus crisis thing going on, a lot more people are transitioning to a place where they can work from home, and a lot more companies are going to start saying, hey, why do we need offices? Okay, so in that environment, we're going to see an acceleration of that trend, almost certainly, right? More tools in that space, it's going to lower office costs, there's going to decrease travel costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're getting a more globally mobile workforce. And when you have a globally mobile workforce, it creates issues for them in their tax systems. Screw them. Like, what do I care? They mismanage the money. Screw those guys. Anyway, that's me being a little bit emotional about the subject, touchy on it. But let's look at, okay, all right, so the U.S. has it. There was some talk about having a bill that would kind of help alleviate tax for Americans abroad. And of course, Americans abroad can benefit from the foreign earned income exclusion, and there's potentially some ways that they can help to reduce their tax using international structures and things like this. But let's assume that, they're not in that situation. There was a talk of, severely easing up, and there was a bill that, didn't go through, but maybe sometime in the future. However, that being said, I really doubt it. Why? What's the problem here? Well, the problem is the majority of voters live in your country. So those people's attitude, why would they defend the people who are outside the country? They don't understand it. They don't have a concept that this might just be a normal person who's gone and lived abroad. They're, doing graphic design and they're living in Thailand and using Thailand's system. Maybe they're contributing to Thailand's tax base. Maybe they're in Germany, they're contributing to that, okay? So when you have a lack of defensibility, it's the tyranny of the majority that was warned about when the U.S. was founded, right? That was the concern they had, was that the majority would provide a dictatorship and abuse the minority. In this case, the minority are those who are living abroad, okay? It's just the way that it goes. And they're outnumbered. So just from a pure representational voting standpoint, they're at a disadvantage. However, it is a possibility that more countries will do this. Canada, Australia are obvious ones, but I would look at Europe as well. Europe is a little bit interesting because, in theory, the right of a European to go and live in any other EU country, the freedom of movement of people and goods and capital, is, maybe a little bit violated by that. So they, maybe will have, who knows what they'll come up with. But just look at the situation. At least in Canada, they have the ability to print their own money. Their debt is basically local debt, so it's not, for the most part, the story that's being created by this moron politician is a nonsense story. Like, he doesn't understand the monetary system, he doesn't understand all this kind of stuff, and he's simply, it's envy, basically, is what it boils down to. Now, if you look at people in Europe, though, a bunch of these European countries can't print their own currency. So I was just talking to a client in Spain this morning. I was looking at a report. So 21% of Spain's economic value comes from tourism. Well, the tourist season is probably wiped out. So Spain, Italy, Portugal, Greece, ouch. Croatia, well, Croatia's not on the euro, so not as much of an issue. Cyprus, though. Malta, probably. Like, these places are going to have a brutal year. They're going to accumulate a lot of debt. How are they going to pay for that debt? They're not countries that can print their own currency. So they either have to get bailed out by the EU, which so far EU solidarity hasn't appeared to be very good, or they need to be in a situation where they're going to, basically do some sort of austerity mixed with some sort of tax, or they need to default, or they need to turn around and say, well, restructure their debt somehow, or they need to break off of that currency, right? And even then, they would have to, the debts are typically denominated in euros. So very bad situation for those guys, and I think there's a strong reason to believe that they will clamp down. And how could this be relevant? Well, there are some very efficient tax regimes in, for example, Spain. I think it's 6 years you can get more or less territorial tax, more or less tax-free, so you can pay a minimum of tax. There's a non-habitual residency program in Portugal. Greece has a program now. Obviously Cyprus is, tax favorable. Italy less so, but imagine how much, Italy and Greece were a mess before this thing whole started. Now they're going to be really a mess. So anyway, bottom line is just these programs. Some of the people were arguing, well, let's look at Portugal as an example. There's a blacklist for CFC rules. And people would argue with me, well, even though Hong Kong is on the blacklist, they're probably not going to apply it because the NHR people, are bringing value to their country. But it's like, well, hang on. If you're looking and you're seeing, hey, these people are living in our country and they're not paying tax on their dividends, and we can enforce this blacklist thing right now, we need money, where are they going to look? So I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think that it's quite inevitable that a bunch of countries in the world are going to raise taxes at this point in time, kind of looking forward over the next little while. I don't know which ones and I don't know how much, but it's likely to happen. And going after international people is going to be a big deal. So very, very important to come up with alternative strategies, come up with proper tax planning. If you can do corporate tax planning, great. If you can look at leveraging this to build teams abroad and take advantage of substance, even better. So if you'd like help with that, reach out to us. If this is interesting to you, subscribe to our video. It would help us if you share it, honestly. We're trying to build our subscriber base, going little bit by bit. And if you have questions, reach out. You can check out offshorecapitalist.com, offshorecitizen.net. You can leave comments, let us know what it is you'd like to see. And I'm going to try and produce more and more content over the next little while to try and keep you guys entertained and informed while we're all locked down. So I will look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.